everybody. Welcome to Ladies Bible Class. We are on week 3 of our current series. It has published on October the 13th. I've recorded a few days before. It's actually Saturday, the 10th. We were doing a round of videos for our preschool, and so I figured I would just jump on in since everything would be set up. That is, again, why I'm in our children's Bible class area, because I was already set up here. And we are studying 1 Corinthians. Today we are going to look at chapters 6 through 8, 6, 7, and 8. And we are looking at the book Living Love When We Disagree by Melissa Spoolstra. And again, we're on chapter 3. Jake covered chapters 1 and 2 and the last few weeks. And so if you haven't had a chance to look at those, this is a really great study. And so I encourage you to just stop where you are, maybe go back and look at those first 2 videos, and then pick this one up whenever you are able. I think it's beneficial to go in order on this study. Not everything that we do is like that. Sometimes it's a series of standalones with a central theme, but this one really does build from one week to the next, and we will refer maybe to previous weeks. So I encourage you to take a look at those. Again, I'm really just grateful that you are here with us today. And if you are not here on Tuesday, don't worry. If finding things in YouTube feels just a little too fussy, we will also give a link to this particular video for whatever is our current video in our Wednesday email. And so you will get that and don't feel like it's a day late or that you're behind. We're so flexible right now. That is one of the highlights and that I've been able to find during our current COVID situation is we've had to become flexible, and it has allowed for us to embrace a little flexibility, and sometimes it's kind of nice, like a situation like this. So if you would pray with me, I'd like to say a word of prayer before we start, and then we're going to dig right in. Lord, thank you so much for bringing us together today. Thank you for this opportunity that we have to still connect with one another. Thank you for your word, and thank you for the hearts of all of those that are sharing together today in this lesson. I pray that you will grant us with guidance and wisdom in discerning your word and help us to take that out into the world. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, we are going to jump right in because we have 3 chapters, and I don't want to keep you here all afternoon. I'm afraid my voice might give out eventually. So, I have to say, I think I need to take a look at what weeks I'm signing up for a little bit better because I got the good ones. So, I really spent a lot of time with this because in this particular set of information with this passage here, these 3 passages or 3 chapters, there's a lot of information that feels seemingly disconnected. And so we are going to spend a little time today connecting that. And again, let's just back up a little bit and make sure that, I know we're all on board, but just in case you did not watch the first 2 videos and you don't feel like going back just yet, we are in 1 Corinthians. We've already looked at chapters 1 through 5 with Jake and established that the church in Corinth is a new church. They are in a city, it's a port city that is a mecca of people that travel in and out. They have people coming in from all over. And so all of those people are bringing in their belief systems, and they have a lot of cross-culture happening. Now, at the same time, we have this new church in Corinth that is being mentored by Paul. He helped them get going. He's their point of reference. He's who they go to whenever they have problems or if they need understanding. And so they have written him a series of questions on how to deal with just some of the everyday situations that they are coming across. They don't know how to make it work, and they are not sure which way to go and how to deal with some of these situations that are of more sensitive topics. And so again, we have a new church in a very thriving city that has embraced a lot of different cultures, and then we have a counterculture with Christianity that they are new to. So with that in mind, this series, these 3 chapters that we will be looking at deal with a direct answer to the questions that they had previously written to Paul, and he is writing back to them and trying to answer them the best that he can. We will find as we're going on that he can be very direct. Sometimes it sounds rather harsh. The way that he is answering their questions, we don't know if this is, this could have been something he already dealt with in person, and then now he's getting a letter. And so he's taking it very seriously, his role with them. He's being very clear because obviously there is some confusion going on, and they need that clarity. They need there to not be a lot of ambiguity with his answers. They need clear direction. And so he's trying to provide them with that. So with that in mind, in this study, what we are really looking at is how, when we come across these types of conflicts, whether they are interpersonal, if they are within the church, if they are social conflicts, that is where we have a clash of cultures, how do we effectively tackle these conflicts? How do we deal with them from a loving perspective? And so what Jake had brought our attention to last week, and what we also touched on with our study guide, is that the goal here is not to bank off of what another person has said to you as much as being Christ-minded, and that is where we are trying to come from, and that gives us a foundation. We used that word a lot last week, the foundation of where to work from, so that we have that solid base to be able to deal with these things in a loving manner. So we're going to try to pull that concept together with this letter from 1 Corinthians. So let's get started right in on chapter 6. Chapter 6 deals with lawsuits in the church. And I want to be clear as we go in on this that Paul is not talking about getting the authorities involved in criminal activity. It's not he's not telling the church to handle their own issues where they would need to call the authorities to come in. We're not talking about dangerous situations, somebody physically attacking another person, threats that are on them from other people. We're not talking about that. We are talking about what would be considered civil lawsuits. And so these are very interpersonal. They are property squabbles, business disputes, things like that. So we are going to read in chapter 6, verses 1 through 8, and Ruth Ann Pruitt is going to read that for us this morning, and we'll come right back.
I'll be reading from 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. If any of you has a dispute with another, dare he take it before the ungodly for judgment instead of before the saints? Do you not know that God's people will judge the world? And if you are to judge the world, are you not competent to judge trivial cases? Do you not know that we will judge angels? How much more the things of this life? Therefore, if you have disputes about such matters, appoint us judges, even men of little account in the church. I say this to shame you. Is it possible that there is nobody among you wise enough to judge dispute between believers? But instead, one brother goes to law against another, and this is in front of unbelievers. The very fact that you have lawsuits among you means that you have been completely defeated already. Why not rather be wronged? Why not rather be cheated? Instead, you yourselves cheat and do wrong, and you do this to your brothers.
Thank you, Ruth Ann. So, what we have learned, again, remember I said that Paul he's really to the point, and it can almost sound kind of harsh the way that he's getting onto them, essentially. He's getting onto them for having these disputes between themselves. Now, there's a quote that's referenced in our study guide from N.T. Wright, and it says, "In the eyes of the world, a public dispute between Christians is a sign that Christians are really no different from anybody else." Or everybody else, I'm sorry. And, I think that is, in a nutshell, really what the problem is. The problem isn't that people are not getting along. That is regular human behavior. The problem is that there's this knee-jerk reaction to automatically going through the court system. Now, just to back up a little bit, in Corinth, they were very close to Athens, geographically. And so we do have a lot more information about Athens and how their court system worked. Sometimes there were juries of hundreds of people, and it became somewhat of a public spectator sport to watch these courtroom dramas play out. And so I think it's a fair assumption, and we do have a little record, that Corinth is kind of set up the same way. And so people would watch these court proceedings as entertainment, and it was just kind of written into their everyday life. And I imagine it's much like watching Judge Judy or the People's Court, but it's in person. And so it was just very normal for people to respond this way whenever they had interpersonal conflicts where legal disputes, typically involving money, were happening. And what Paul is asking them to do is to change their thinking and to change their actions. Instead of going through the court system and putting their argument out for the world to see, especially if it's a form of entertainment, he's asking them to handle that in-house. Now, I dug in just a little bit to find us something that sort of, gives us some guidelines of how do you go about that? How do you do that? Because we have the same situation now. People go to court all the time. If you've ever had to go to court for any reason, the docket for every day is pages and pages and pages and pages. It's so many people for so many reasons, and we all know this. This is not shocking information at all. And so what Paul is saying is still very relevant to us now. And again, I'm not talking about criminal activity where somebody really needs to call the authorities and have them step in. We're not talking about that. We're talking about property disputes. Your fence fell on my car. Or business disputes. A small business loan that didn't get repaid from maybe one church member to another. These are things that can be handled in-house. And in Matthew 18, Jesus gives some guidelines for whenever we have a situation. It's not exactly about legal disputes, but I do think that it's relevant. I think it's relevant instruction for this particular situation and for others as well. So I'm going to read this to us. It's Matthew 18, 15 through 17. "If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. If they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector." So Jesus' advice and his instructions here about whenever we have an interpersonal dispute in the church is to, number one, to speak to that person directly. It doesn't need to be a matter of public record. Just talk to them person to person. If that doesn't work, then you grab a few trusted people that you know are as unbiased as possible, that are also a part of our church family or your church family if you're not a part of this body and you're in another one, and little body, and talk to them with a few witnesses. A lot of times the accountability of a witness will help somebody come around. Now, if that doesn't work, then strike three, go talk to the church. Go talk to your elders. Go talk to your church leadership. Talk to a minister. Say, hey, I've really tried to work this out. If at that point it just cannot be resolved, then let it go. That's really hard for us to do. Let it go. Just move on. And, the reality is that we're talking about, in our church family, we're talking about people that love each other. At the 3-step process, just about most anything's going to be worked out. There's going to be a solution. There's always a solution, especially when people work together. And this is my opinion of how we can approach these interpersonal legal disputes in love that happen within our church family. We can, number one, talk directly to that person. Number two, if we need, get a few witnesses, get some support. Number three, talk to leadership if you really need to. Now, this is if nothing is working out. If everything worked out on step one, then great. Dust yourself off and move on. And then at that point, then we just have to let it go. And here's why letting it go is so important. It's not about just generic forgiveness, and it's preserving the relationship. So there's a quote that we are going to come back to several times today that is in our book that Melissa has pointed out. And these are her words. It says, focus on relationships rather than rights. That really struck me more than anything else that was in our chapter 3 study, is that phrase right there. And we are going to utilize that throughout chapter 7 and 8 as well. I think that is the goal. That is the point of what we're trying to do. So, moving through the rest of, remember I said it felt a little disconnected. Well, because he's answering a series of questions, and so that's why it feels disconnected. So now we're going to move on to a very quick part of the back end of 6, which is the sexual immorality of what's happening around them. They see some stuff happening that they don't believe is okay. And there was this philosophy. There's a lot of philosophy that went on in Corinth during this time in Athens, and that whole part of the world, philosophy was a really big deal because people were going to think their way into a better world. And people still do that. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that we're coming from a place of spiritual truth. And philosophy can oftentimes hold a little nugget of truth in there somewhere, but it oftentimes also really feeds the ego somewhere in there. Sometimes, not always. Philosophy is really very interesting, but there is more. There is more that we need to work with. And so that's why we don't stop there. We keep moving with our spiritual development. So there was a philosophy at the time, and we're going to talk about this again here in a little while, that basically your physical body was just physical. When you die, it's gone, and there's really no connection to anything else. And so sexual sin, sexual immorality, it was incredibly commonplace and normal. It was normalized in this society. And it sounds familiar, it's very normalized in ours. And so trying to know how to reach people whenever they were in the middle of that kind of lifestyle was one of the questions that was proposed to Paul. And so he just wants to remind them, and we are going to talk about this again throughout this study, that their bodies were not just purely physical. They were not always separate, that they were a whole being, that they weren't separate from their soul and from their spirit, that they were a whole being. And in verse 6, from 19 through 20, it says, "Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? Do you not know your own? You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies." So honoring God, not an idol, not another person, with their own body was a new concept for a really old problem. So by honoring God with their bodies, then it takes care of a multitude of things, including sexual immorality. I feel like in Corinth at the time, this school of thought is very much kind of like what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas kind of thinking, like, doesn't matter what you eat, doesn't matter what you drink, doesn't matter, who you have sex with, it's just body stuff. And so he's trying to bring them into a deeper way of thinking and help them see that they are a whole person, that give them a holistic view of their being instead of these separate viewpoints of a physical body and a soul and a spirit. So we're going to we're talking about the fun stuff today. So we're going to go into chapter 7, and chapter 7 is dealing with mainly with sex within a marriage and then also with the unmarried. And they have questions. And one of their questions, and again, he does get a little bit harsh with this, he also has a lot of personal opinions, which he does admit are his personal opinions and his personal direction. And so, not that that's not decent advice, it's just he's very clear that these are his personal feelings, that these aren't commandments from God. But that he's elaborating a little bit and putting two and two together for them and helping them to navigate their way through all this information. And so some of the members of Corinth at the time of the church in Corinth, they had this idea that they were trying so hard to be good that they went completely to the other end of the spectrum and decided that all sex was bad, even between married people. And so Paul is trying to explain to them, he's doing a little group marital counseling, that this is not a good idea, that it's going to put so much strain on the marriage that it's going to cause people to commit adultery, to have infidelity, to stray outside of the marriage so that they can keep to these crazy rules. So they're justifying, it really makes no sense at all. So there was some type of justification where you could have sex outside your marriage with a non-believer, but there's a lot of different ways that you can go about this. And I studied a lot of things, and they were all kind of all over the place. But what it comes down to is that he is telling them sex within your marriage is a good thing. In fact, you probably need to keep your relationship open and honest and not hold it against each other, not use it against one another. Those are not healthy practices. That's not emotionally healthy. To do that, you want to keep things open and honest. And he also does talk about the role of a husband and wife. And we've heard this before, that a wife is supposed to honor her husband. It's funny how a lot of times people stop there and they don't read the rest of the verse, which is that a husband is also supposed to honor his wife. And so I think all I really would like to point out right there is that all of the instructions that Paul gives for that relationship, for this relationship, for this marriage, they are even. They are equal instructions for both husband and wife. Nobody is getting more rules than the other. They are instructions that are based in equality. And I think that's something really important that we need to see that's within that passage. And again, going back to acting out of, getting out of these conflicts through love, whenever you are in a marriage, I feel like I can speak about marriage. I've been married for 20 years. Whenever you are working from that place of love, there's very little that you can't figure out. And so there's no reason to not be equally open and honest with one another about everything, including this. So then he talks about the unmarried. And he gives the advice 3 times to just never get married. And most people can't do that, and he admits that. And he does say that it's better to go ahead and be married than to be overcome by lust. If that is something that is not an issue and you are happy being unmarried, then that's perfectly fine. But if you do want to be married, then that is also not a problem. That everybody's called to live their life the way that God wants them to. Now, he does mention about celibacy and the rules of divorce and in the unmarried. He is going off of initially the commandments that God has given out, but he elaborates just a little bit with his own personal opinion about his own personal life. But I think that we can all read that and see that he was trying to come from a good place, even though it does sound like he's really trying to get everybody to just be single. He's trying to come from a good place. Now, we all know, how does this relate to ourselves, right? Okay, so we all know that sexual immorality is completely normal. Like, again, just like the amount of, courtroom proceedings that happen every day. This is not shocking. This is not new information. You guys already know this. I know this. We know. All you have to do is turn on the radio or the TV, and it's right there. That does put us into a place of conflict oftentimes as being seen as a counterculture, because we, as Christians, typically do not advocate that type of behavior. Now, I do have a few questions for you. We know about divorce rates. We know that some people choose not to marry at all. We know about sexual immorality. We know about infidelity. These are not new things. Does this go against your own personal moral code? Okay. Have you ever had any of these situations in your life? I dare to say probably yes to both. I think very, very many of us run into yes to both. And so we see it in other people. So again, how do we deal with this in our reality from a place of love? So I'm going to, first off, remind us of my favorite phrase for this chapter, which is focus on relationships rather than rights. That's where we're going to go. That's where we're going to start every time. Because the laws of our society, they say that you can do whatever you want between 2 consenting adults. You can do whatever you want. That's absolutely true. You can. It doesn't mean you should, but you can. And we have to, when we put relationships before our rights, our right to do whatever we want between consenting adults, then we put our love of God, we put our love of Christ, we put our love for each other first. Whenever we put that relationship first, we put love first, not our rights. We take a back seat on that. And so that helps us to make better choices for ourselves and in helping other people. And I'm just going to give 2 quick pieces of advice before we leave this part of the subject. If you are concerned about someone else's sexual behavior and you feel like you are being drawn to talking to them, if it's regarding their spirituality, please do your homework before you talk to them. You need to pray about it before you talk to them. You need to ask for guidance and direction and let God move your spirit, and if he tells you to be quiet, then stop talking. And then my second piece of advice is that if you are concerned about your own sexual behavior or sexual activity and you feel that you need some assistance in that area, then please find somebody that you can talk to. Pray about it, ask for guidance. Find somebody that you trust that you can talk to. And if you don't feel that you can find anybody to open up to, then you can come to anybody in leadership at this church. You can come to me. Nothing shocks me. Nothing bothers me. So if you need somebody to talk to, we're here for you, and we can have the tough conversations, because that's what we want to do, because we are putting relationships before rights. The love of God, the love of Christ, the love of other people before our rights that our society has given. So we are going to keep moving into chapter 8. Now chapter 8 talks about being a stumbling block, and it has a scenario that we don't really have in our common everyday society right now in Dallas, Texas, USA. So we're going to have to look at this just a little bit, and we are going to start by a reading from Bimpe McMillan, and she's going to be reading from chapter 8, verses 9 through 13.
Hello everyone, and I'll be reading from 1 Corinthians 8, verses 9 through 13. I'm going to be reading from the New International Standard Version. Be careful, however, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak. For if someone with a weak conscience sees you, with all your knowledge, eating in an idol's temple, wouldn't that person be emboldened to eat what is sacrificed to idols? So this weak brother or sister, for whom Christ died, is destroyed by your knowledge. When you sin against them in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I would never eat meat again, so that I would not cause them to fall. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you so much, Bimbe. So at this time, let's talk about this a little bit, because now we're talking about idols and sacrifices and eating the stuff that's been sacrificed to idols. So at this time, we have this massive cross culture. We have a clash of cultures happening in Corinth. They're all intermingling. And we have the counterculture of Christianity, where also people are bringing in all of these different cultures, and they're intermingling. And there's a lot of belief systems that are trying to be sifted through in real time. And one of those belief systems that is very prevalent within a lot of the different religions that are around them is sacrificing to idols. And so whenever somebody, so that is something that for the people in Corinth had, that was a good reference for them. That was a really good reference for them. It's kind of a strange reference for us, because we don't necessarily have that problem. But what Paul is really trying to get at, he's talking about idols and he's talking about stumbling blocks, but here's his point. What he's really trying to get at, and this part does apply to us, is that we can get so caught up in how much information that we have about a subject and so many facts about it, and we can make such logical conclusions about what is in front of us that we just rely on the facts. We just rely on the data, the facts, and we don't take into account the heart of it. We don't take into account the spiritual nature, the consequences of relationships, the consequences to a person's spiritual health. And so that is the part that Paul is trying to make here. And in this particular situation, he's using this metaphor and this story about the meat that's sacrificed to the idols. So oftentimes in Corinth and other cities as well, the meat that was sacrificed to the idols, after it was given as a sacrifice, then it was like taken home. People would take it home to eat it. The people that brought the meat would give it. They'd give it back to them. Sometimes people would take it to the market and sell it. But for the people that had the belief system in the idols, this was all sacrilegious to them. To mess with that. That was put there for a reason, not to be sold at the market, not for somebody to take it home as leftovers. And so they were really hurt by that. They were really, really deeply offended. And for the Christian community, they know that this idol is nothing, that you're wasting perfectly good food by leaving it at the feet of a statue. You're just wasting it. And you have hungry people that could actually eat that as a meal. I totally 1,000% understand the logic with that. I think my first reaction to seeing that type of activity would be the logical reaction. I totally understand that. Why would we waste food whenever it's sitting right there, ready to eat, and we're wasting it on a statue so that we can appease somebody and help them feel better? That makes no sense to me. But whenever you take into account the heart step of the situation, whenever you come from a place of love, whenever you come from a love of a respect of another person's belief system, even if in everything you've got in your heart you know they're wrong, even if it is a different culture than you, even if you don't understand it, stepping all over it is so horribly offensive that you have damaged any chance that you have of really forming a lasting relationship with that person. And God can intervene and fix that. He can heal all relationships, absolutely. But you've done serious damage. You've made it really hard. And that's what we're talking about here. So how does that relate to us in our everyday? Okay, and we will talk about the stumbling blocks. I know it's supposed to focus on stumbling blocks. We're getting there. Stay with me. Give me 5 more minutes. So, how does that relate to us? We crave diversity in our church. We crave diversity on a Sunday morning. We crave diversity at our events. We want to bring in people that are from all walks of life. We open our doors and we say, we want to do this. We love everybody. This is for all the people. But then when it comes to actually being with and creating relationship and getting to know other people that might do something that's totally different and might believe in a way that's totally different and might have a path that's completely different, we're very quick to bring out our self-righteous judgment because we know so much and make that person feel like this is the last place they ever want to be. So I think it's wise to take a step back, allow people to be where they are, and as the moments present themselves, because whenever you work out of love, God's going to create the moments. The Holy Spirit's going to create the moments. You don't need to script out moments. They're going to be there for you to say, well, here's what we believe and here's why. And I understand that might be different than what you're used to. How do you feel about that? Is this confusing? Does this make you feel uncomfortable? You can build a relationship there. You can do that. We can do that. I can do that. I just have to remember to keep my mouth shut about all the things I think I know, because we really don't know very much. So, holding another person's lack of knowledge against them is not acceptable. We can't do that. We all know this quote from Maya Angelou. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. We cannot hold against another person what they don't know. and we cannot swim in the egos of what we do know. So let's move on to stumbling blocks, because I'm trying so hard to help you wrap up in your 40 to 45 minute time frame. It was so hard. There's so much going on with this. So let's talk about stumbling blocks. How does this fit in with a stumbling block? So Paul uses this idea of whenever you eat the meat that's been sacrificed to idols and somebody else really believes that that's true, and you're saying, no, buddy, you just don't understand how the world works and how offensive that is. And then here comes somebody else who says, oh, well, they did it. I can do it too. And it causes this chain reaction of behavior, because even when people don't understand the methods and don't understand and don't have a knowledge of Christianity, there is a magnetism. There is a natural magnetism to universal truth that is based in love. Absolutely. All human beings are attracted to that. They're attracted to that. And the more we act out of love, and the more that is seen and viewable from the outside, then the more attracted people will be to that light. It's like a moth to the flame. It's just natural. It's how God set up our universe to work. And so whenever we do something that we feel like we have every right to do because it's logical, it's a logical choice. Wouldn't you do this, that, and the other? Because that just makes sense. It's what the data says we're supposed to do. And it has maybe some hurtful repercussions for someone else. And then somebody witnesses that. That reflects back on all of us. And that totally damages the potential of relationship with that person. So how does this, because again, it's so hard to use sacrificing to idols with our everyday. I could metaphor the sacrifice and the idols and all that, but we don't need to do that. I think that we have modern everyday situations where we can be a hindrance and a stumbling block to somebody's spiritual growth. And the first one that always comes to mind, somebody isn't going to want to hear it, but the first one that always comes to mind is social drinking. Social drinking is so difficult for a person who has an alcohol trigger in their background. It could be personal, be something they're personally trying to overcome. Maybe they grew up with an alcoholic. It's the reference also. It was the first thing that I thought of whenever I was reading through this, before I even got to the same reference in our guidebook, in our study guide, because it happens so much more than people have any idea. And it is one of those things where one way that I feel like our society looks at it, dieting is another one. Whenever somebody's really trying to make healthy choices in their life, and then somebody brings in the birthday cake. I'm not saying don't have the birthday cake. It's just, can we just be consciously aware of other people and their struggles and what they're dealing with? And if somebody says that they don't want to go to something because they know there's going to be drinking there, they don't need to put their whole life on display. If we know in our hearts that that's the situation, then let them go. Let them handle themselves. I feel like I don't think that this is a real problem in our particular tribe. I think we know each other pretty well, and we can be rather honest even whenever it's difficult. We don't know newcomers coming in what their situation is. We cannot assume these things, and so that is something that we need to be careful about. But I don't think it's a major issue. But I have seen it happen. We've all seen it happen. It happens at the office. This isn't just a church. It happens at the office. It happens at school. It happens within a circle of friends. It definitely happens with old friends that you haven't seen in a long time. that you've made choices in your life that you want to keep, whether that is that you aren't going to drink alcohol, you don't want to be around it. Maybe you don't want to be around, you don't want to partake in fast food. Maybe you're maybe it's very, very important to you that you don't use styrofoam and plastic straws. Maybe it's really important to you that you go to a locally owned business that is owned by a person of color and that you support them with your money and that you don't want to go to Chili's. If these are things that you've made a decision about, we don't feel like we can speak up about it. And then because the group is saying, oh no, we've got to do this, we just go along, and then we feel guilty, and now we've got this little spiritual scratch there that's going to create a scab, and we're going to, and it's going to itch, and now we've got a place to heal. And, we can't just like bow down to everybody's weakness or something that they're working on or something that they're super, super convicted about. We can't do that. That's not a healthy place. But there's a way that we can work together to just be aware, communicate with one another, and also be very, very careful about using another person's level of personal responsibility and accountability against them. This is where I think it becomes a problem, is whenever there's an attitude that's formed out of, again, the rights of the majority that says, well, if they've got a problem drinking, then don't drink. It's not my problem what you choose to do. That's your personal choice. Why should it affect me negatively? Again, we are going to put relationships ahead of our own rights. Relationships rather than rights. Because whenever we put our rights aside, when we love God, when we love Jesus, whenever we love other people first, then we form relationships. And that's what I'm going to end us with today. So, this was a heavy lesson because this was heavy material, and that's what I get for picking out this book. If you have not picked up a copy of this book here, right here, I don't know what we have left in the office. That's a Sharon question. I can certainly find out for you. We got these on Amazon. It was just a few days, and they're not real expensive. If you would like for us to get you one, if you would like to order one, and you'd like some help with that, or if you just want to look it up, it is Living Love When We Disagree. Again, I found this on Amazon, and we had ordered a handful in the office. If you've asked for one and haven't picked it up, we still have it. I highly suggest getting this book. I unfortunately just don't have the time right now. Our COVID world has me almost working 24 hours a day, but eventually it won't. And I'm looking forward to really going through this piece by piece. It has a day-by-day study. It's not absolutely necessary to be a part of this discussion, not at all, but it is a really great study. And so I encourage you, if you are finding a little extra time on your hands because of our current situation and because of social distancing measures, and you really would like to dig into something, it's short and sweet, it's 6 weeks, and I think it's really worthwhile. I think this is great material, and so I encourage you to take a little time and look through this. And I am going to do my very best to do the daily studies all the way through chapter 4 for you next week. That's my commitment to our study, is that I will do my best to get with it for chapter 4, and I will meet you back here next week, and we will talk about chapter 4, which is again a lot of really fun, disconnected topics that nobody wants to sign up for, but I did it, and so we're going to be just fine. No, it's going to be great. I hope that you're going to be here, and I look forward to it. And next week, again, we'll talk about chapter 4. If you didn't pick up your book, give us a call, and if you need to get one, and you'd like some help, give us a call. I love you. I pray that you have a safe, happy, restful week full of wonderful connections with beautiful relationships. Have a great week.